Jeb Bush. Jeb Bush.
You're lying.
The Islamic Republic does not represent the great Iranian people. President Trump continues to demonstrate historic leadership on Iran. So why? Jeb Bush is now praising Donald Trump. And why? Is it because Jeb Bush woke up and became a lot better on stuff? No, it's because Donald Trump is finishing off what was the 7th country on General Wesley Clark's list of 7 countries that were to be toppled.
7 countries that were to be toppled on behalf of Israel, I might add. And the fact that Jeb Bush, a notable neocon who Trump just humiliated on the national stage in 2016 and destroyed his chances of winning that election, the fact that he is now praising Trump is not a good sign, especially for the America Firsters who are not in favor of the neocons. And now Israeli media, Cenk, is reporting that the United States is considering intervention in Iran amid ongoing protests that are taking place there, some of which are drummed up by the Mossad and CIA. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, there's 2 super interesting parts of this story. One is I'm beginning to change my mind on how involved Israel was on Venezuela. And 2 is what kind of disaster are we going to have, not just about with Iran and Venezuela, guys, but with this attitude that Trump has now, that he's kind of invincible and can do any kind of military excursion. I believe that's gonna lead us into an epic disaster. So let's give you the facts first and then we'll discuss.
Now I should note that Trump's approval rating has increased following the effective kidnapping of Maduro, Nicolas Maduro, of course, and his wife, Maduro, the former leader of Venezuela, and so that's likely emboldening him. And if you pay close attention to Israeli media, as I do, because they actually report the truth when it comes to what's being plotted for the United States and additional interventions, well, the Jerusalem Post claims that there are indications that Washington is weighing some targeted intervention to assist the protest movement to get over the top of the Iranian regime. Now, there are ongoing protests in Iran. I'll give you more information on that in just a minute. Now, Tehran's weak attempts to recover from the June attacks, the protest movement, and America's quick ability to potentially influence the direction of Venezuelan policy by using military force without having to mount a large ground invasion may have changed the calculations, to which I say that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. If you compare Venezuela and Iran, well, really, there is no comparison. Iran has a formidable military, and the idea that you just go in, take out the Ayatollah, and everything will change in Iran for the betterment of Israel's expansionist policies, that's the real goal here, is ridiculous to me. And Israel thinks that the toppling of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela does increase the likelihood that the Trump administration will be willing to do this. Israel is also checking if the removal of Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro will make action against the Iranian regime possible. Now, I should note that Netanyahu immediately held a special security meeting after the US carried out its actions in Venezuela. So they're definitely plotting, there's no question about that. And the Jerusalem Post further reports that by themselves, the protests in Iran, okay, the protests are likely still viewed by Israel and the US as insufficient to topple Khamenei. However, following the abduction of Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro, this may have changed. Now, former Defense Minister Benny Gantz explicitly called for Israel and the US to intervene in Iran on behalf of the Iranian protesters to either cause the regime to surrender or to topple it. And by the way, let me just remind you about the protests, which sure, I mean, I have no doubt that there is dissent among the Iranian population toward the current Iranian regime. That doesn't mean that the Iranian people would like the United States and Israel to invade and install a puppet government on behalf of Israel, which would benefit Israel and not the Iranian people. And I should note that the Mossad has publicly admitted on Twitter to assisting Iranian protesters in the field. Iran has claimed it has even arrested one of these agents, Mossad agents. And one other concerning and possibly foreshadowing element to this story is what President Donald Trump posted on Truth Social, saying that if Iran shoots and violently kills peaceful protesters, like Trump would like to be able to do here in the United States, which is their custom, the United States of America will come to their rescue. We are locked and loaded and ready to go. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So Cenk, I think that at this point, I don't know how imminent it is, but knowing how much influence Israel has over our country, our government, knowing how persistent they are, and knowing how empty-headed Trump is when it comes to pretty much everything, but especially foreign policy these days, I think this is gonna happen under his watch.
Yeah, so some version of it's gonna happen. So let's talk about that in a second. First, I wanna explain why I said what I said earlier. So there's this really interesting irony that the Israeli press is so much more trustworthy than the American press, because the Israeli press doesn't serve Israel. It serves different factions within Israel and trying to get at the truth. Some of them, obviously they look at it from a framing of an Israeli point of view, as almost the press of every country does to some degree, right? But there's a variety of opinions and no one is suppressed for being an anti-Semite, right? Because they're all Jewish, right? So here in America, when I see a story about Israel being surprised at the Venezuelan invasion, I think it's probably the exact opposite. It's probably an American media operation that got it from a source, and and they know that source is likely lying, but they print it anyway. And that source is lying to get you to believe the opposite of what's true. They wanted it, they encouraged it, etc. But when I see it in the Jerusalem Post and I see it in the Israeli press, I go, oh wait, that's interesting. So here, let me give you a quote from it. They said in this story, it appears that Israel was surprised by America's intervention in Venezuela and that this action scrambled Israeli calculations about what might be possible in Islamic Republic of Iran. Okay, so that's super interesting. So it sounds like they really didn't expect that he would do this. And to be fair to the Israelis for being caught off guard a little bit there, it really is crazy. He really shouldn't have done it, right? So it's nuts to go in and just attack a country that didn't attack you, no claim of self-defense really, and kidnap their leader. That's nuts, right? So it appears the Israelis wanted it, but it wasn't a top priority for them. And we were telling you that Venezuela was a confluence of events. Probably oil was the most important. Even that's complicated because it involves the refineries on the Gulf Coast want it more than the oil companies do. There's defense contractors, etc. And we did the story yesterday of the speculators on Wall Street making a lot of money from it, and they usually drive policy. And Israel was part of that mix, we told you. And if you made me guess what percentage, I might have guessed 25, 35%, something along those lines. Now I'd lower it. I think that it's, yeah, they definitely wanted it, but it wasn't a high priority for them. Like Iran is such a higher priority.
Of course it is,
right?
Yes.
So, but now that it's happened, they're like, oh, that's beautiful. Okay, let's do regime change from a distance. Like getting on the ground was a mess in Iraq. Yeah. And we'd love to make the Americans do it again, but they seem a little reluctant. So can we do this regime change, by just bombing or protests or whatever or capture? Yeah, and now, Anna, I think to answer your question, I think that's fool's gold. Terrible idea, terrible. So first of all, what did we even accomplish in Venezuela? I don't want to get into the whole Venezuela thing other than just to say, we do not control the country. We have nothing on the ground. All they have to do is say no, then we would be left with no choice but to put boots on the ground, right? To do a second military attack and have someone on the ground directing the Venezuelan government, right? So they think it's already over and we own Venezuela. That's absurd. That we just got started, nothing is close to over. If you think you could do that in Iran, that's even harder for reasons we'll get into in a sec. So I just think, Anna, that this is going to, because Trump thinks he nailed it. He thinks he nailed Iran, he thinks he nailed Venezuela. He doesn't understand anything about ramifications of his actions, consequences, etc. So now I feel like he's gonna go on a literal warpath where he thinks, oh, who cares? Yeah, let's knock over Cuba and Colombia and Iran. Iran's gonna be a piece of cake, okay?
Yeah.
So it's gonna make it easier to reel him into that much more disastrous war.
And look, to be fair to Trump, if you consider this being fair, and I do, Trump isn't alone in being terrible in terms of what he expects to happen or what he predicts to happen in all these various regime change wars or invasions that he's been mulling over the last few weeks. The thing that kind of makes Trump's stand apart from others like the neocons of the Bush administration is that he is far more impulsive and easier to manipulate based on his ego. And so considering the fact that he is now surrounded by individuals who are telling him that what he did in Venezuela is a big win, that is going to motivate him to do more of it, especially as if you look at the polling, and Harry Enton reported this today, his support, especially among the Republican voters, has increased following the ouster of Nicolas Maduro. But Cenk is right. The Venezuelan regime that was led by Maduro remains. His vice president was sworn in. And while she initially had some defiant statements and demanded the release of Maduro, she later released some conciliatory statements and says that she is willing to work with the United States to prevent war. And there is some suspicion that she might have struck some sort of deal with the Trump administration behind Maduro's back. And so if that is the case, if that regime remains, but that regime is far more compliant with the United States, in a way, the Trump administration is kind of right because they are able to control that regime far more than they were able to do so under Maduro.
So yesterday we talked about how there's a 10% chance that we have a secret deal with Rodriguez and the CIA worked it out and she's gonna be a puppet for us. And then that won't necessitate a second strike or boots on the ground, and then they'll think it was a spectacular success. Why do I have it at only 10%? Because, okay, so let's say that the vice president is in on it. Is the defense minister gonna go along? Maybe, but now you've changed the odds. Is the interior minister gonna go along? But now you've changed the odds. Are all of the generals gonna go along, or are some of them going to be loyal to Maduro, or think, screw Maduro, screw Rodriguez, I'll just take the power. There's nobody in charge, right?
Yep.
And then Maduro, this is to me is critical. We'll see if it winds up becoming relevant. Maduro had militia groups supporting him on the streets. So they ride around in motorcycles, etc. And so if we go on the ground, those guys are gonna be the insurgency and they're gonna pick us apart. But if we don't go on the ground in this initial stage, it could be that the militias combine with the military, etc., and cause some sort of issue. So my point is just getting one person on our side, the VP, even if it's true, doesn't solve everything, right? The fact that at some point, somebody in Venezuela is gonna realize, you know what? The Americans aren't here. Like, yeah, they could do a bombing. Yeah, I'm a little worried about my life if that happens, but I'll be super prepared. And this country's for the taking. There's no one on the ground here, right?
Yeah, there are a lot of possibilities that could play out. Usually attempts at overthrowing a leader or engaging in regime change doesn't go as planned. So we'll see how this plays out. It's really difficult to predict. So we're gonna wait and see how this plays out. And more importantly, we'll see whether or not Trump is serious about going after Iran. But lately he's been hyper-focused on Greenland. And I don't think he's lying about that. He really does want to take Greenland over because of the natural resources there.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.